Happy noon, everyone. I am Diera Godinez, and I'm the Director of Legal Services with Immigrant Legal Center. My pronouns are she, her, ella. The ILC is a nonprofit law firm, and our mission is to welcome immigrants into communities through high-quality legal education and advocacy services. I'm here with you for this Lunch and Learn to discuss the documentary on Netflix, Immigration Nation. We're going to talk about immigration law and policy, including immigration enforcement policy changes under the Trump administration that this show highlights, know your rights information, what it looks like on the southern border for asylum seekers and their counsel and families, and how to take action. So as a quick introduction, this is a really heavy documentary to watch. It includes 6 one-hour-long episodes where it exposes ways ICE interacts with immigrants. ICE is an acronym for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. It is literally trauma felt by undocumented immigrants displayed on screen. Undocumented individuals and their families do not need to see what the individuals on the documentary are living day by day, because many of them live this life now. But to others who have the privilege and have not lived the life of an undocumented individual or spent time researching and learning, this could be a real eye-opener. In this documentary, you see immigrants in detention centers, immigrant veterans living in exile after deportation, and even immigrant bodies found at the border. From the very first episode, in the first few minutes, there are ICE ride-alongs, interviews with ICE personnel, ICE entering and even breaking into homes without search warrants, and families are separated on screen when parents are picked up from their homes or parents are separated from their children on the border. So without further ado, let's dive in. Today, I have with me some brilliant legal professionals. We have first Roxana Cortez Mills, Rural Capacity Building Managing Attorney with the Immigrant Legal Center. She is going to help answer some immigration legal questions that may arise from the show. Roxana, will you wave and share your pronouns, please?
Hi, my pronouns are she, her, hers, and ella in Spanish.
We also have Alexis Steele. She is a policy staff attorney with the Immigrant Legal Center. She's going to share some call to action pieces that may influence change in immigration law and policy. Alexis, will you wave and share your pronouns as well, please?
Hi, I'm Alexis, she, her, ella.
For those of you who are unfamiliar, Immigrant Legal Center was formerly known as Justice for Our Neighbors Nebraska. And even though we changed our name to the Immigrant Legal Center, we remain an affiliate of the National Justice for Our Neighbors Network. And with us today is Ella Rawls from Arizona Justice for Our Neighbors, who's going to share her experience living in a border region and give us an overview of Operation Streamline. Can you wave, please, Ella, and share your pronouns?
Hi, my name is Ella, and she, her, ella.
And last, but certainly not least, we have Legal and Policy Counsel of the ACLU of Nebraska, Rose Godinez, who's going to help us dive into some scenes on the show and how individuals can assert their constitutional rights when encountering ICE. Rose, do you want to wave and share your pronouns too, please?
Hi, I'm Rose, pronouns she, her, hers, and ella.
All right, so if you all don't mind, I want to jump right into the show from the beginning of the very first episode. In the first few minutes, you see a ride-along, and then an officer goes into an apartment building. He knocks on the door and asks the individual to open the door. The woman answering the door begins to talk through the door, and the officer says, "I'm not going to yell through a closed door. That's not how we do business." The woman opens the door and reluctantly lets a parade of ICE officers who have identified themselves as police in. So the first question I have is for you, Rose. In that scenario, can you explain how that scene might have gone a bit differently if the woman had not opened the door? Did she have to open it? Why or why not?
Yeah, I think first off, it's important to note that that is how ICE should do business, right? And the first tip that I would give everyone is no, you do not have to open the door. And if the police is at the door and they knock and they're saying police, first thing you ask is with what agency specifically. So then they have to disclose. Unfortunately, ICE often uses police as a way to access people inside of their homes. You never have to open the door. Your home is actually where you have the most rights. It's your castle. It's not like a car where you're riding along and everything is visible through the window. If police truly have a warrant signed by a judge, they can actually just open the door. They don't need your permission to go inside. So often what ICE uses is an administrative warrant, which is not signed by a judge. So in these types of situations, what we would have recommended that woman is to let them knock on the door, then ask for a warrant after you ask them what agency they belong to. And if they say they have a warrant, then ask them to slip it underneath the door or through a slot in the door and review it. See if the actual name is correct. See if it's actually signed by a judge, if it's the correct address. And then take a picture, send it to your attorney if you don't understand it, or just send it to someone that can review it for you. But either way, if ICE truly had a warrant signed by an immigration judge, they can come in anyway. Now, let's say if you want to talk to them and aren't afraid to chat, maybe you are a permanent resident or you're a US citizen, then I would recommend going outside the door, closing the door behind you and discussing with them. But again, remembering that you don't have to do that. If the woman in the scenario had not opened the door, it is very likely that ICE would have left and probably wouldn't have actually gotten an actual judicial warrant because it would take so long to get the judge to actually sign it. And it would just be an extra effort.
Thanks, Rose. As part of the arrest in that apartment, so a man is arrested and the officer begins to ask a gentleman, ¿de qué país, or what country are you from? Can you tell us a bit about whether that individual has to answer that question?
Yeah, so the individual in this case did not have to answer that question at all. In fact, you don't have to answer anything except in Nebraska, the only thing you have to answer, and that's if you are asked, is your name. But aside from that, you have the right to remain silent. And additionally to knowing that you have the right to remain silent, if you are undocumented, you do not have to say where you are from, how you came in. And some of those scenarios, you would hear individuals just say outright how they came in, or start presenting documents from their home country. We don't recommend you doing any of that. Just say your name if you are asked and then invoke your right to remain silent. Do that orally so that it is clear that you are invoking your right to remain silent. And even if you start talking and you're like, oh, I have the right to remain silent, remember you can invoke it at any time afterwards. Oh, one last thing. Also, don't lie to the police. Just remain silent.
Thanks, Rose. So I'm gonna ask Roxana a question related to the answer that you gave, because the gentleman that is arrested in that scene forgoes his right to remain silent, right? And he answers the question. And so Roxana, can you address what impact might an answer about country of birth have on that individual's immigration case?
Yeah, definitely. So the impact of outright answering the question and letting a ICE officer know what country the individual is from is going to have a huge impact in removal proceedings. So if a person is undocumented and this is the first time they get picked up by immigration, they're more than likely, depending on the circumstances, going to be placed in removal proceedings. And this is going to be before an immigration judge. Before an immigration judge can order a person removed, the Department of Homeland Security has the burden of proof of alienage. In other words, they have to prove that the person that is in removal proceedings is not a US citizen, that they're from a different country, and that they do not have permission to be in this country. The easiest way for DHS, Department of Homeland Security, to prove a person's alienage is by having the person in removal proceedings, the immigrant, admit that they are from a different country. So essentially, if a person answers that question, they're doing the government's job. They're helping them. They're making it easier for them to be placed in remote things and perhaps be removed.
So Roxana, you mentioned a judge. Once this gentleman is taken to the ICE facility and the ICE officer says something along the lines of, that guy knows there's no judge for him, there's just a return ticket. So can you explain a little bit about what that means?
Yes. So generally speaking, a person has a right to fight their case in court one time. And if the person has, in theory, already fought their case in court and they have been order removed once by an immigration judge, then that's their only chance to see a judge. If they have been order removed and haven't left, or order removed, left, and re-entered, and then they get caught again, then they're going to be subject to something called expedited removal. That means that if they get caught, they're going to be removed as soon as the government can remove them without the ability of that individual to see a judge or even their attorney. And so in this particular part of the episode that you mentioned, Diera, the individual had a prior removal order, so he was subject to expedited removal and he wasn't going to be able to see an immigration judge again.
So let's talk about removal and priorities under the Trump administration, because this show highlights the Trump administration, right? And I remember ICE officer Judy during a ride-along stating the floodgates are opened. She said, it's not like we went back to the way we were. We were never like this. It's a different world. So how is the Trump administration different from the Obama administration, for example? Wasn't President Obama once referred to as the deporter in chief? How is this a different time than under the Obama administration?
Right. That's a great question, because it is true. President Obama was oftentimes referred to as the deporter in chief, and that came from the fact that during his administration, many people were deported. What is different, or one of the primary differences in these administrations, is that with President Obama, there were priorities for deportation. And so at the very top of the priorities were people with serious violent crime convictions. There were people with prior removals, and they were not, so the officers were supposed to use this 4 tiers of priorities to identify where to focus their efforts in detaining people. They weren't supposed to just go out and pick up whoever they found on the street. There was a part of on the episode where there was an officer that said, well, even though there were priorities, we could pick up ancillary people that we found. And I think that has always been the case, right? That didn't stop being the case with President Obama, but it doesn't take away from the fact that the majority of the efforts were supposed to be guided by these priorities. Now, with the current presidency, the current president, he issued an executive order in 2017 where he changed or did away with all of the priorities of deportation. And he essentially, through this executive order, he made every single individual who's here in the country without authorization, undocumented, whether he or she's an overstayed their visa or came here without authorization, a priority for removal. It doesn't matter if the person has ties to the US, it doesn't matter if the person has or doesn't have immigrant or criminal history. If they're undocumented, they are all a priority. And that's where you get that just anybody that is on the way essentially gets arrested, right? There's a part in the documentary where there's an individual that says, I'm here. He's already in detention. He says, I'm here, but they were not even looking for me. They found me and they picked me up. And so this is one of those, I think, ancillary consequences. It's about the numbers, just about how many people they can detain, regardless of whether they are people who should be detained or not.
Thanks, Roxana. So I'm really excited that we have Ella Rawls with us today. And so I'm going to switch gears a little bit because, you know, in the center of the United States, right, and in Nebraska, at the Immigrant Legal Center, we serve Nebraska and Southwest Iowa, may look a little different than they do in border states and in Arizona. So Ella, if you don't mind, let's talk a little bit about how the Trump administration changes may have had an impact on the border region. Can you talk a bit about your experience living in a border region and how ICE or Customs and Border Patrol present impacts individuals living there?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and talk about this important documentary. So the Trump administration, there are many, 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 many things that have happened since he came to power. So one of the things that comes to mind immediately is the border wall, right? And so in the southwestern part of Arizona, we have Oregon Pipe National Park, and they are destroying parts of Oregon Pipe National Park in order to build the portion of the wall that that he had been proposing for this long time. So another thing that has been happening under the Trump administration is also related to the wall, but it's related to the wall in Nogales, Arizona. And that is, they put barbed wire on the US side of the border wall. So that perpetuates this militarization of the border. It instills fear, makes people think that we are in a war zone, and we are not. It is a very calm and quiet city, honestly. I go to Nogales. I used to go once a month to go meet with pastors there. And so it creates this fear that's, in my mind, unnecessary. So another thing that was really important that happened that affects a new project that we have going right now is that during Trump's administration, he started the metering system. Now, the metering system, it's called different things in other places, but it started at the Nogales border in the summer of 2018. And that's when asylum seekers are presenting at the border. And before the metering system started, they were processed like normal, expressing their fear, and then being received into the US to begin their asylum process. Arbitrarily, one day, the Border Patrol says they do not have the capacity to process so many people all at once. This changed overnight. And then they started giving out numbers, like a number like at a deli counter. And you would have to wait in the border cities in Mexico for them to call your number. Now, it works differently in different border towns. For a very long time, the people that were running the shelters in Nogales, Sonora, were aware of what the numbers were, and they were in communication so that they could let residents at their shelters know that their number is coming up. And they used to give a number, one number per family. So, but now that's not happening because our border is closed because of coronavirus. And so there are a lot of things that have happened, and that is dealing with the Trump administration. But when we now move into coronavirus, now there are, people are not allowed into the United States. There are exceptions for US citizens and permanent residents, but someone who has a visitor visa, unless they get special permission, is not going to be allowed into the US. There are people who have visas to emigrate into the United States, and they are not being allowed in. And specifically, because we are so close to the border, they are rapidly removing people from the United States. So they're not even allowing individuals to have a chance to have their day in court, like Roxana was talking about. They are getting them, and they are kicking them out. And they're saying that it's because of Title 42 of the US Code, and that deals with public safety. So it was not that great before Trump, and it's gotten even worse during him, and it's gotten even worse because of coronavirus. Just to give you an idea of some of the things that were going on before Trump, we have permanent interior checkpoints. And I don't know if you guys have any in Nebraska. I kind of don't think so, but they're primarily along the border. There are a lot along the southern border. So there's a checkpoint that's about 15 minutes from my house. And when I'm going to this checkpoint, I'm not passing any international borders, but because of our proximity to the international border, which is about an hour and a half away, they ask me if I'm a citizen while I'm in my vehicle. They ask me if I'm alone in the vehicle, and then they have their drug sniffing dogs walk around my vehicle. There are 2 checkpoints I regularly go through between Tucson and toward Nogales, but there are a few more once you go west towards California. There are a ton in Texas. We also have to talk about the heightened surveillance that happens about being here near the border. So there's this beautiful town about an hour and 15 minutes away from where I live. And this place is gorgeous. My mother lived there for a short time. I would never move there. And that's because they have a giant drone in the sky above the town, and it patrols over the town. It looks like a blimp. And it destroys any privacy that town residents might have in their backyards. I couldn't ever live there because of that. And I just think that that's not the way that we should be handling border security. Also in our area, it's far too common for a routine traffic stop or a traffic stop that is pretextual to be prolonged by local law enforcement in order to contact and wait for Border Patrol to detain an undocumented person. Because where I live, we don't just deal with ICE, which is highlighted in this documentary, we also deal with Border Patrol every day. And Border Patrol will stop people on suspicion of their lack of immigration status. So a couple more things, because I feel like it's really important. So in Pima County, where I live, we have the most dangerous stretch of land border with Mexico, our Sonoran Desert. And it's ridiculously hot during the day, and it can get really cold at night. During the 90s, Border Patrol used Operation Hold the Line near El Paso and Operation Gatekeeper near San Diego to funnel migration through the desert as a deterrent for unlawful entry. So these operations increased the rate of migrant deaths in the desert, making death in the desert a common phenomena. And there are multiple groups today that try to find and provide assistance to migrants who are bracing the desert. And there's also groups to help connect families to their deceased loved ones who have passed in the desert.
Thanks, Ella. So you talked a lot about instilling fear and public safety. And I remember during an episode, there's an ICE officer that says in the documentary, you should be uncomfortable. You should be looking over your shoulder. You aren't welcome in the United States. There is no harbor here. And so I want to touch on that a little bit with you, Alexis, if you don't mind. So the ultimate end of immigration court and appeals, if one does not prevail, is deportation, which we've had clients tell us is like a death sentence. And fear of this end may lead to immigrants fearing reporting domestic violence or other crimes to the police. And that, of course, can have an impact on public safety. Can you talk a little bit about these implications on public safety and maybe include a little bit about what a U visa is and how police department policies, including declination of signing U certifications, can even further affect public safety beyond just what occurs at the border that Ella explained?
Yeah, certainly. So as you pointed out, and it's important to keep in mind, individuals who are in removal proceedings are already incredibly vulnerable. They're in a position without stability that most people take for granted. And they don't know if they're going to be present in the United States. And that often is a question of being able to be with their families. And it's a big deal where there's a lot of insecurity. And like other vulnerable members of our community, they are targeted. And when they suffer from a crime, there is a lot of fear that's been instilled from the ways that our law enforcement and federal government has used law enforcement as a tool of terror to target the immigrant community. So you have individuals who are suffering, but are afraid to report crimes to the police. And that's a problem because that means that those criminals that victimize them remain on the streets and are a threat to the entire community, and remain a threat to those victims who might have to see them on a regular basis. And it's an issue. So one of the things that fosters that sense of insecurity and that inability to trust and communicate with law enforcement are blanket policies, like you mentioned, that where law enforcement will not engage with the victim to respond to requests for information on a federal form. Those forms are relevant to various forms of humanitarian-based forms of relief, such as U visas and T visas that are for victims of certain crimes and human trafficking, respectively. And for those victims of those crimes to apply for that life-changing stability and chance to heal from what happened, for those individuals to apply, they need certification from law enforcement, or it is extremely important to the success of their application. So when law enforcement has a blanket policy that says we're not going to, we decline to learn about or recognize our authority to certify this information on these federal forms, it debilitates and effectively bars many individuals from even being able to apply for and be considered for relief that they unfortunately merit from having suffered what they have. So those policies are really harmful. They destroy trust in the community. They leave the entire population victims remaining vulnerable, and it's something that speaks a lot to a community's priorities and whether that priority is safety of everyone, or declining to engage with someone who might need information for a federal form simply because of an immigration matter that isn't actually even at all relevant to the crime.
Similarly, Alexis, will you talk a bit about another sort of policy that we sometimes hear about in the news media and was brought up as part of this documentary, 287G program?
Sorry about that, I am muted again. Certainly. So the 287G program is an opportunity for state and local entities to contract with the federal government to use limited state and local resources to help enforce federal immigration laws, or help with that, even when that has nothing to do with crimes or anything that those state and local agencies and entities have authority over or have resources dedicated for. So those agreements are very harmful to the community. They effectively weaponize entities and especially law enforcement that otherwise people would look to for as those who serve and protect the community. It weaponizes those agencies instead as tools to use resources that are local and could otherwise be used for community enrichment, to instead apprehend individuals at moments like those that Ella described, that can be as minor and mundane as a taillight being out in the back of your car. And then that official, if getting information from you and learning of your identity and like what Roxana said, you do not need to share your country of origin. You do not need to share those things or how you enter, but an agency that gets that information can then use state and local resources to hold that individual for the federal agency, and really without even knowing exactly why or what is on the other end of that. Those agreements are incredibly harmful. They make it very difficult for communities to trust law enforcement. If you are an individual who's vulnerable, and let's say you don't have, you're incredibly vulnerable, let's say you don't have documentation, no one chooses to immigrate without documentation. That's something that happens because that person is vulnerable. And so when that person who's already vulnerable is now being threatened or experiences something awful and can't report to the police, that harms the entire community. And it's something that predators will use and tell victims. You cannot tell the police, they don't care, or you will, good luck. You tell the police, you'll get deported. And that is a threat that is potent, because for some people who have the privilege of not worrying about these things, maybe it's just, a threat of police being called. But for someone in vulnerable individual shoes like these, like you said, it's like a death sentence. It can be a death sentence. So those agreements are incredibly harmful. And in addition to all those community issues that it creates and safety issues, there are also legal issues. There are a lot of complex, thorny issues of due process that state and local agencies that are not expert in immigration or other legal matters can easily violate, incurring and triggering liability on behalf of those agencies, none of which does the federal government cover. So again, it's just another drain on resources, and it's just detrimental overall.
So Rose, to follow up on that, you've been doing a lot of 287G advocacy right here in the state of Nebraska, and in collaboration with Immigrant Legal Center and some other statewide organizations and a local organization, Unity in Action, right?
Yeah.
Would you mind sharing a little bit about your work in Nebraska as it relates to 287G?
Sure. We've been really fortunate in having amazing allies in Dakota County, including Unity in Action, and there's the Native American tribe, local Native American tribe that has been supportive, and the business community. Not so long ago, actually, we had a petition going with over 20 businesses, local businesses from Dakota County, calling for an end to the 287G program. We had a petition going with hundreds of Nebraskans asking the Dakota County Sheriff to end the 287G program. And just last year, we had a annual steering committee meeting where we told the sheriff, and it was not just ACLU, that was the faith community, the business community, just regular people in Dakota County that don't want this program there because it harms their neighbors and it deters people from even moving there. A lot of people that I've talked to that live in Dakota County are even looking to move because the Dakota County Sheriff continues to renew this program. And it's troubling that first of all, he joined the program without even consulting the community and expressed interest. And even when he received criticism of him joining the program, continued to renew it for another 2 years. So it just continues to show that our work isn't finished and that we must continue to look at options and how to end the program, which includes a bill that has been introduced in the past by Senator Vargas to target these programs and to ensure that notice is given, at the very least, notice is given to the communities so that they can oppose the program and it's on the record. So that's something we look forward to having hopefully introduced next year and something to keep a lookout for.
Thanks, Rose. Let's switch gears a little bit and hone into some terms utilized as part of this documentary. Over and over again, we hear the ICE officers use this term collaterals. Can you explain what that means and some of the most important know your rights information related to collateral arrests, including perhaps whether an individual has to show their identification if ICE asks for it?
Yeah, I think first off, I absolutely dislike the word shadows, and I'm sure everybody here agrees, along with the term illegal. It's dehumanizing and it feels like we're a piece of property, which we're not. And at the end of the day, we should acknowledge that we're all human beings, and that's how they should at the very least say, or persons instead of shadows. But anyway, and instead of collaterals. They use it in the film specifically to add on to what Roxana said, to describe situations where ICE may go into an apartment, or they're walking along a street with a group, or you're riding in a car with someone that's potentially undocumented. And those people, the ICE is going after a specific individual, but then apprehends everyone that's in the group. So in these types of situations, there are a couple of things that you can do if you are not the target, but the individual that's, which also applies to the target. You know, the target obviously has rights that I've mentioned before, but individuals that are with the individual that's being targeted also have rights. And one thing that I would like to highlight that hopefully we can include in the links is a red card that you can carry along with you, that it's a card that you can present and you carry along in your wallet or your purse, and you can present to ICE, and it essentially tells ICE what rights you're exercising, which is your right to remain silent, your right to an attorney, etc., if it is that you're being detained. So when I refer to a red card, that's what I'm referring to, and you can find it on the ACLU website. I also think Immigrant Legal Center has it, so feel free to reach out to those resources there. Now, talking about the specific rights for the individuals in those situations, whether you're in the car, in an apartment, you have the right to remain silent. Again, and I know I say it so many times, but it's the most important right you have. And apart from saying your name in Nebraska, there's nothing else you have to say. Then let's say you're in the car and the individual that's driving is being detained. Do you have to provide an ID? No. Do you have to provide your name? Yes. But aside from anything else, you don't have to say anything. And you can, at that point, say, am I free to go? If the police officer says you are free to go, then calmly walk away and head home. Same thing goes in your apartment. If an individual that you're living with is being detained and you're caught in the middle, say, am I free to go? And then if you're free to go, then leave the apartment or house and go on your way. Calmly, don't run away, because that can only just bring up suspicion that you're not here legally. And then if they say, no, you can't leave, then at that point you are being detained. At that point, it's when your constitutional rights are triggered. So you have the right to remain silent, you have the right to an attorney, do not say anything. And then you'll have a phone call once you're in the jail to make that call to your attorney or a loved one that hopefully knows who your attorney is and what to do afterwards. Another right that I'd like to talk about for individuals that are caught in these types of situations is that you have the right to film. Say you're an individual that's a citizen, or even if you aren't a citizen, you have the right to film under the First Amendment. And something I would suggest everyone have, even if you're a citizen, is the Mobile Justice Nebraska app that automatically uploads anything you film to the ACLU of Nebraska. So then it is protected. It's a little different than just filming on your phone, because if your phone is taken or destroyed, then you'll lose access to that. So that's something that you can do and remember, and that many times we forget to do because we're caught in the situation, but it can also preserve quite a bit of evidence if the individual who's being detained has their rights violated. And finally, you have rights under the US Constitution, regardless of your race, regardless of your immigration status. So don't be afraid to exercise them because nobody else can do that for you.
Thanks, Rose. So the next question is for you, Roxana. So in the documentary, we see an individual that may or may not have been arrested or got final orders of removal and then released, and they have to periodically check in with enforcement and removal operations. Can you talk a bit about these check-ins and include what they are and maybe some measures of safety planning that are important before those check-ins take place? And finally, sorry, this is a really compound question. Will you add in a little bit about, I remember a gentleman from the show describes those check-ins as a lamb going to a slaughterhouse. And so I just wanted to like highlight that quote and ask you to share a little bit about what this gentleman may mean by that.
That's a great question, and one that has a couple of different answers, I think. So you mentioned the gentleman in the documentary. I think he might, there's one that might have had a prior removal order, and then the one that says, it feels as though they're walking into slaughterhouse, he doesn't. So a person can be placed in this sort of like is the equivalent of probation, I would say. It's an alternative to being detained. We don't have enough space to keep everyone who is in the country undocumented applying for a benefit detained. As a matter of fact, it shouldn't happen, right? So you see, I would say, two groups of people being placed in these programs. The first group of people, which is a big group, is people who cross the border, they're detained very close to the border. They get caught by Customs and Border Patrol, they get detained, and eventually they get released to any state, for example, Nebraska, inside the country to apply for the benefit that they've said that they are applying for. For example, asylum is a very common one. So if they express a fear of returning to their home country and they pass a credible fear interview, then they're allowed to come into the country to stay with a family member, to file their application in immigration court. But while this is happening, they're having to go to these check-ins to ensure that they're going to go to the place that they said they were going to go. So for example, Nebraska or Lexington. And being part of this check-in is a way that immigration can keep track of these individuals. There's a variation of intensity to the check-ins, right? At first, when a person is first placed on the alternative to detention program, it's very common for them to have an ankle bracelet. And in addition to the ankle bracelet, it's also very common that they are going to have in-house visits. The frequency depends on the individual. Sometimes they happen once a week. In addition to those in-house visits, it's also very common that at the beginning, they're required to have a landline. So that on a given day during the week, they're supposed to expect a random surprise phone call from their ISAP officer to check in, to make sure that they are there, that they haven't left, that they haven't ran away, that they're still in the place where they were allowed to be released. And in addition to that, once a month, they are also required to go to sometimes a local office. If the person, for example, here in Nebraska, if they are, for example, in Lexington, they're required to go to North Platte, so to a bigger or to the nearby office to report and check in. And then at that in-person check-in, a document is signed to ensure that they're still in compliance. This is discretionary, so people are not people who are placed in this alternative to detention programs, in a way, are at the mercy of ICE, because these programs are discretionary. If at any point the individual who is in this program violates one or a combination of the requirements of the program, the person can be taken back into custody. It won't necessarily mean automatic removal, right? But it means that they would have to fight their case, detain, and that in and of itself can create a really difficult situation. It can make it a lot more difficult to have access to counsel, access to evidence to prove a case, and so on and so forth. And so I think that that's what the gentleman who said that it's almost as if they're walking into a slaughterhouse every time they check in, that's what he was referring to, because they're showing up because they're required to show up. They want to be in compliance. They're doing everything that the officers are asking them to do. And yet every time they show up, there's the possibility that they're going to be detained and that they won't be leaving that building. Did I answer all the questions?
Yeah, I think so. I do have another question for you, Roxana, though, about a woman that goes in for her check-in appointment. There is an officer that explains that she has had a removal order since the 90s, and she has 3 USC children, children who are US citizens. And so a question that I feel like I hear a lot, maybe on social media or as part of presentations, is that phrase, why don't they just get in line, or why don't they just apply for citizenship? And I'm wondering if you can address that really common question that we hear.
That's a very, very common question. I think the first thing I want to say is that you cannot go from undocumented to applying for citizenship. It just doesn't, there's no express line for that, right? And if you want to think about immigration in terms of lines that people can make, there's very, very limited amount of lines that people can make. And so that means that there's a very limited categories or ways in which a person can come to the U.S. with proper documentation or become get a green card and eventually apply for citizenship. The way that I can, or the categories that I can think of are family-based. You can apply for a humanitarian visa, right? You can perhaps apply for employment-based visa, but you have to have been abroad and brought into the country with the visa already. Then there's also the law enforcement-based visas that Alexis mentioned briefly. So if you have been victim of a violent crime and you have cooperated with the investigation, you might be eligible for a U visa or a T visa or VAWA, and there's a diversity lottery. Well, the diversity lottery is a category that I'm gonna throw out the window already, because at least our clients are not going to qualify for that. The diversity lottery is for countries that have had historically low migration numbers, and all of our clients come from countries that have high migration numbers. So that's not even a possibility. The law enforcement one is a line that a person can only potentially make if they have been a victim of a qualifying crime inside of the US. And even then, even when people have been victims of violent crimes, they face a lot of the obstacles that Alexis talked about earlier. So I'm gonna potentially throw that one out the window as well. And then there's a humanitarian-based one, right? So the humanitarian-based one, it's when you're thinking about people applying for asylum, for example, and for that, asylum law is a very complex area of law, and people have to be aware that they have the right to do this, right? The right to seek asylum. A lot of the times, it takes a while for the person to learn about the possibility of applying for this relief, because they spend their first couple of years just trying to hide if they came here undocumented. And there's a 1-year asylum bar, right? So if the person didn't apply for asylum through the proper channels within 1 year of coming into the country, more than likely they're going to be out of luck and not be able to pursue that avenue. So then that just leaves us with the last category, or the first one that I mentioned, which is family-based. And even though you might think this particular example that Deara presented is a woman that has 3 US citizen children, well, how come she hasn't applied to become a citizen, right, or to get a green card? Well, it's not that easy. There are a number of rules that apply to this category. And the first one that comes to mind is that those children have to be of a certain age before they can petition for their mother to get a green card. They have to be 21 years old. So having a child in and of itself is not guaranteed that the undocumented parent is going to get a green card, right? The first step is that the qualifying relative, that US citizen children, has to be 21. Assuming that we're at that stage and that the child is 21 years old and that they can apply, the manner of entry, the way that that person came into the country is going to determine whether that person is even going to have a chance or when they're going to have a chance, right, to get that green card. If the person didn't come with a visa, they just entered without inspection, they came into the country without proper documentations through the desert, like most of our clients do, then they're out of luck, because more than likely they have accumulated more than 1 year of unlawful presence in the US. In other words, they have lived in the US. If their child is a US citizen and the child is already 21, they have at least 21 years of unlawful presence, which means that, and they don't have a lawful entry, right? So the fact that they don't have a lawful entry means that they have to leave the country to ask for a green card outside of the country. Leaving the country then would make them subject to a 10-year bar, which means that they will not be able to get a green card for at least 10 years. So, and the process is a lot more complicated, but this is just to give you an idea of the reason why there might not be a line for a person to make. And even if there is a line, that it's not straightforward, it's not that easy. So that probably is the reason why this woman is not a US citizen yet.
Thanks, Roxana. So as we're sort of ending or nearing the end of the hour, I want to make sure I touch base with you again, Ella. It's so awesome to have a border attorney with us today. And I'd like you to explain a little bit about Operation Streamline. What is that? What does that mean?
So Operation Streamline. Okay. In as quickly as I can say it, right? So Operation Streamline is it is a federal court process that individuals are placed in if they have been in the United States and been removed and then come back unlawfully without permission, then they will be and if they're caught within the border region, then they would be put into this program called Operation Streamline. It is an expedited process to put them through the federal criminal court that gives them a felony of illegal reentry after deportation. So I'll give you a quick little history lesson about it. So, well, before I do that, I want to go back to some of the things that Roxana was saying. So in immigration court, you have certain things that you're allowed to get done, right? In immigration court, you are not entitled to a court-appointed attorney. You are given the right to hire and pay for your own private attorney. So this is often misunderstood here in the area because people talk about Operation Streamline. So immigration violations have long-lasting impacts for people seeking immigration status later. And because of IRA, which is legislation that was passed in 1996, we started marrying immigration violations with criminal penalties. So then we started to have this illegal reentry after deportation. So in federal criminal court, you are entitled to have an attorney represent you. And here in Tucson, that is the public defenders the federal public defenders that are able to represent individuals in Operation Streamline and their federal criminal process. This is what it looks like. This program started in about 2005. There are possibly up to 70 people at a time that are shackled and brought into a courtroom. While lawyers are available for them, those lawyers only have 20 to 30 minutes to get to know their clients, find out what they want to do, and represent them before the judge. So those 70 people would go through their legal process all together in groups within a 2-hour process, within a 2-hour period. The defendants would be charged with illegal reentry after deportation, and they're encouraged to sign a plea bargain with the government to plead guilty and serve a prison term of illegal entry, leaving them with a permanent criminal record. This is really important when we're talking about people who want to apply for asylum, because if someone has a removal order and then afterward they get processed for illegal reentry after deportation, then that is a very, very difficult situation, probably won't qualify to apply for asylum afterward because of that combination of things. So it's important that when people are presenting to the border, we understand, number one, that's not unlawful entry. That's someone presenting to the border according to our rules to ask for asylum. And if it gets switched and individuals are criminally processed before being allowed the opportunity to ask for asylum, then they're essentially being precluded from applying for asylum in the future. And that's actually really important for what's going on right now. We just started a project to talk to individuals who are asylum seekers on the Mexican side and tell them about what's going on. And I have to tell you, in the border area, there are a lot of people who go across the border often. I mean, for generations, it's been a very fluid area. And so this issue comes up often. So just one last thing I want to talk about. So that's the difference. Operation Streamline, you get an attorney, it's a criminal process. Immigration court, you do not get an attorney presented to you. You can go out and pay for your own. And you have to proactively do that. They won't provide one for you. So let me just finish with this. So we have a legal system here that refers to undocumented individuals as aliens. And our federal code allows for this criminalization of migration. So things must change right now. These two facts contribute to why some people call actual human beings unlawful instead of undocumented. I want to make it really clear. No human is illegal, and it harms our brothers and sisters who are from other countries to call them that. So I think that just needs to be said.
Thank you, Ella. Before we give some closing thoughts, Alexis, let's hear from you specifically regarding a call to action. What can allies do to respond and try to change the system where we deny immigrants basic human rights and a humane or sensible path to citizenship?
Absolutely. As an ally, there are a lot of things you can do, and the three biggest things are to be a listener, an observer, and a voice. And I mean an active listener. So that means listening to, if you aren't an immigrant, if you're not part of the immigrant community, be listening, be watching, be an active listener, and believe your neighbors when you hear about what they're experiencing, what they're suffering. Be an observer, not a passive observer, but an active observer. If you see an immigrant or an immigrant individual being treated poorly, or maybe in the process of what can be an apprehension or something scary, you can be an active observer. You can be an active ally by observing and recording. We have a video that we shared earlier from Brooklyn Defender and Witness.org. Please go ahead and check that out. We'll probably link to it again. And then being an active voice. When it's your turn to use your voice, speak up, for those individuals, especially those that are vulnerable and those who can't or aren't in a position to speak. So thinking of situations like anyone and everyone should be able to speak to their lawmakers. Our representatives and senators, our lawmakers represent us, the whole community, all Nebraskans, has nothing to do with where anyone's born or anything of that stake. But at the same time, it's important to recognize that some people with privilege, your different privileges empower you to lift up others. So privilege, you don't need to shy from it, just use it to help people. If you can, call your senators. As Rose mentioned, we're looking at, there are tons of local policies that can impact the community, 287G agreements. This last session, Senator Vargas had an LB 369 that would have required notice, just letting the community know when an entity might have been considering a 287G agreement. Support that. Reach out to your senators and say, look, we need our community to have that awareness and to have that option when that comes up. Call, express that support. If you're nervous and you feel uncomfortable calling a representative or a senator and speaking in person, you can call after hours. It's okay, just call it after hours, leave a message. It's that outreach that really matters. And I'll tell you what, if you really want to make an impact, write a handwritten letter. Not many of those are received, but make it clear that immigrants matter to you. They're a part of our community, and if you're not one of them, leverage that angle that you might have that others don't. And then that's not strictly state and local matter. That is all the more important when it comes to federal matters, and we're thinking of those elected officials. After listening and believing your neighbors, keep those issues in your heart when you're making decisions and contacting senators with outreach. Keep your neighbors in your mind no matter what. With something like the CARES Act, for instance, many immigrants were left out of that, and they certainly aren't left out of infections because our community is suffering even higher rates. So be aware of that, speak out. Say, hey, I want this stimulus supported. Could you please vote for it? And can you please make sure every member of our community is included, and emphasize your immigrant community, immigrant neighbors. And then things that are very apparently related to immigration, like things with the Dream and Promise Act that would give a clean pathway to citizenship for our incredibly deserving, and we're just so lucky to have them, our DACA recipients, TPS recipients, DED. Really just every member of our community is fundamental. It's really important to use your voice and do those things. So if you get that chance, please use it. And if you ever have any questions about how to do that or looking for opportunities to engage in that way, you can always reach out to our office. I encourage you to follow after updates from all of us, because we're all working hard at this. And together we can move forward.
Thanks, Alexis. So we're just past 1 o'clock, and I'm going to ask you all now for some closing remarks. Can we go ahead and let's start with Roxana, just because that you're the first person I see on my screen.
So I just want to echo what Alexis said. If you are in a position of power, in a position where you can contribute or be a voice for the people that oftentimes don't have a voice, use it. We are doing it. We're doing work, but we need the support of everybody out there. So be attentive. Be aware. If you're unaware, if you don't know the stories behind immigration or why we're pursuing certain policies, ask. We're always willing to share. Don't just dismiss it because you're unfamiliar or because you might think that you're not affected. I think asking a question can be the beginning of change.
Rose with the ACLU, will you share some closing thoughts as well, please?
Yeah. The ACLU recently called with 9 other nonprofit organizations for a special session this year to focus solely on racial justice, which would be an excellent opportunity to get a lot of bills like those that were mentioned by Alexis, just local bills that could impact immigrants here in the state. So I encourage you all to contact your senator to ask them to go back to work and focus on racial justice, because truly the last legislative session did not. And then lastly, I think just a tip for everyone, when you see someone, anybody, a neighbor, I think just do a genuine smile. As a daughter of immigrants, anytime my parents saw someone just smile at them, they automatically lit up and felt like they were welcome. And you have no idea how much that impacts. And I know with masks, that's a little bit more difficult, but we're walking around in parks just to feel more welcome. Thank you all for having me.
Thank you so much, Rose. Alexis, let's hear some closing thoughts from you, please.
Just want to say thank you for tuning in, for sticking with us. It's been a delightful and informative lunch hour, and if you missed anything, you can just rewind and watch it, share it with your friends. Again, listen to others, educate others about what's happening in the community, and be bold about being compassionate.
Thanks, Alexis. And our border attorney expert, Ella, how about some closing thoughts from you?
When we started Arizona Justice for Our Neighbors, we're a lot younger than the Immigrant Legal Center. We really came in with the idea that all of us, doesn't matter where you're from, doesn't matter where you were born, are equal. We are all equally children of God made in his image. So I would just ask that everyone remember that when they hear disparaging remarks, when they start to hear individuals dehumanizing the people in our immigrant communities. We are all equal, we are equally valuable and wonderfully created. So remember that, and be the voice for our neighbors when they can't speak up for themselves.
Thank you all so much, and thanks to all of our listeners on Facebook for joining me and the Immigrant Legal Center in such a hard discussion about the reality of how the Trump administration and ICE actors have used racist, fear-mongering tactics to amplify every flaw in the system, in the immigration legal system, to their advantage. We are so blessed to hear and learn from all these powerful women attorneys and viewers. As a reminder, the Immigrant Legal Center has resources, including a Know Your Rights and Safety Planning Guide on its website at www.immigrantlc.org. Additionally, you can obtain a screening and some of this Know Your Rights and Safety Planning information through calling the Nebraska Immigration Legal Assistance Hotline. That number is 855-307-6730. And last and importantly, to donate to the Immigrant Legal Center, you can click on the link in our website that will be available in the comment section below. Thanks, everyone.